Hey everybody, welcome to Let's Get Learnt. I'm very happy today because I'm sharing with you a book by Garry Jennings called Aztec. The reason why I'm so happy is because I read this book in high school and it had a major impression on me when I was growing up in high school. I'm a young adult now, but I guess I was a young adult then. But I just love this book so much that I actually had to get a physical copy of it. I originally got it out of my high school library, but I had to get a physical copy of it. I love this book so much. I had to get a hard. I got a hard copy off of thriftbooks.com. It was great because if you go online, they only advertise the soft cover. I went on Thrift Books and I got a hardcover, and this is the 1980s version too. Was even better. This book is by Garry Jennings. If you don't know who Garry Jennings is, he's I guess you could say a cross between John Steinbeck and Indiana Jones. um, this book, when I Wikipedia'd him, it said he took 12 years to write this book. Was unbelievable. He went to Mexico and he researched it, and I guess in the book itself, I don't know if it says in here. No, okay, it doesn't say in the book itself. But I remember looking him up back then, and it said it took him 7 years to write this book. But on when I Wikipedia him today, it said it took him 12 years to research and write. What is incredible. I highly recommend this book if you're interested in Aztec history, or if you're kind of like a history nerd. Because what basically Garry did is he created this character called Tilitzin, who is kind of like you could say upper middle class. He started out as like an upper middle class Aztec kid. His father worked in a quarry mine, and his mother, I don't think she worked. I think his mother was like stay at home, do chores. But his father was pretty much he worked in a limestone quarry, if I remember correct. It's been 5 years since I read this book, but it had such an impression on me. I remember so much of it. Uh, I'm so happy to share this with you guys. But yeah, Misha Tillotson, he goes through these adventures, he makes friends, and it's basically a story from the time when he was born up till the time he dies. And through all of that, there's so much going on. He uh, gets he gets conscribed into the army because he has to, as a culture, he has to do that. And I guess he gets the Aztec equivalent to like a Purple Heart, and he ends up getting nobility for brave actions. And he gets and then once he gets the status of nobility, he's able to do more things. He becomes an entrepreneur. He travels to the northern, to actually the southern part first, because their main trade partner was the Mayans. So he traveled to the most southern part of Mexico, up to the most northern part of Mexico, and it's just an amazing story. So I highly recommend this book, especially if you're interested in Aztec history, because along the narrative that Garry Jennings writes through Mishtalitzin's, well, he starts off as Mishtil, but then he ends up Mishtalitzin when he becomes nobility. But through the story of Mishitil, there's a lot of describing the Aztec culture, and it's not a lie. It's the culture that he's trying to tell you is actually the culture, and there's a lot of interesting rituals that he talks about, and there's a lot of conversations even on racism, not just like when the Spaniards come, like the Native Americans versus Europeans, but it's Native American versus Native American racism. As you can see, where the Aztecs would call the dog people, quote unquote, that live in the northern deserts because they just roam around and scavenge for food like dogs. So the Aztecs called them dog people. But another name that they called them was also red people, because they were out in the sun for so long that because they just live in the desert, that their skin is just straight up red. And the people that lived in the desert, they didn't quite get that. The dog people, because they thought the Aztecs were calling them red people because they were all red people, right? They're all Native Americans, so it's like, oh, they thought they were just calling them the people. It's like, no, they were calling them red people because they were so sun scorched, right? So there's a whole play on that, and they kind of walks you through when before Moctezuma came to power and during Moctezuma's reign, and how his sister got involved, and how there was a power strife, and even up till when the Spaniards arrived first in the Mayan lands, because Michitil had to go to the Mayan country, um, which during that time the Mayans weren't actually a country. They were like split up. They had an empire, and then their empire collapsed, and they were like separate city states that shared the same culture and identity to the Mayans. But the Spaniards ended up in one of the Mayans' city states, and he even conscribed how Michitil would tell the stories of those Europeans and how they got there and how the tribes interacted with all of them. And that even led on to when Hernan Cortez ended up in a coastal village, and he ended up in a coastal village, and I think he named it Veracruz. Yeah, he named it Veracruz, and how they all went up to go conquer the gold, and they even talked about the siege of Hernan Cortez on Tenochtitlan. But that's later on in the book. I'm getting a little ahead of myself. I'm really excited. But if you want to learn about Aztec history before the Spanish got there, it dives into it, because they tell you about how each city-state became a thing, and how their rituals kind of got started, and how their culture kind of got started. They tell you that the rumors that the Aztecs came from Aztlan, that they thought was in like the northeast part of Mexico, when in reality the original Aztlan came from like what would be now Southern California. So they ventured down, settled. There was a little religious strife. Half of them stayed, and the other half ventured south. What would be the lake in central Mexico, where Tenochtitlan, where Mexico City is now, founded Tenochtitlan in the middle of a lake, because they needed nobody was really willing to give them up any land, so they had to go find it themselves. And once they got there, they had to trade food for weapons, and then once they were able to trade food for weapons, they looked at the weapons and they started making their own weapons. They started selling weapons, and once they just got enough money, enough resources coming in, they just declared war on everybody. And they eventually accumulated the tribes around them into the empire, and then that was the genesis of the Aztec Empire, essentially. It's a really great book. If you're a history nerd, I really recommend it, even though this is historical fiction. There's a very hard evidence and fact in this book, and I think you'll just get a large kick out of it. Plus, it's kind of different from reading a textbook, because a textbook is just like information here, information here. This isn't like textbook information that gets fed to you through a narrative. Was wonderful. It makes it super easy. So I highly recommend this book. This book had a major impact on my life. Mishi Tillotson is my role model, right? It's like I want to be a fierce warrior, expert entrepreneur, and get all the ladies at the same time. You know, that would be great. He's my role model for sure, and up till this day is my role model. So I hope you guys get this book. I got the hardcover on thriftbooks.com, but I'm sure you could get the softcover anywhere else. Well, thanks for listening, you guys, and subscribe to videos. I read some more books. I know you don't want to miss that. And ciao.